Well, I figured that if a fireside chat was enough for one of the greatest leaders in American history to connect with his people, then it's good enough for me. So today, I will be talking about genetically modified organisms by the fire. They are a wonderful invention, and undoubtedly countless lives have been saved due to their creation. The advancement that we have made in the past 30 years since their invention has been greater than all of human history put together up to that point. But this then begs the question, are we moving too fast for our own good, or are we playing with a fire that we don't understand? A fire that we might not understand. Genetically modified crops are an interesting phenomenon in American culture, and the products that contain these crops are incredibly widespread. In some ways, they are also incredibly misunderstood, and a lot of the information out there on the topic can be misleading. It is for these reasons that I have decided to do some in-depth research on GMOs, the current regulatory landscape of these products, the testing and approval processes they undergo, and the future and vast potential of genetically modified crops. In order to better understand genetically modified organisms and the bioengineering of food crops, it is helpful to start at the beginning and with a few definitions. According to the National Human Genome Research Institute, a genetically modified organism, which I will be referring to as GMOs, are defined as a plant, animal, or microbe in which one or more changes have been made to the genome in an attempt to alter the characteristics of an organism. Genes can be introduced, enhanced, or deleted within a species, across species, or even across kingdoms. They go on to state that GMOs may be used for a variety of purposes, such as making human insulin, producing fermented beverages, and developing pesticide resistance in crop plants. The term bioengineered foods is defined by the USDA as foods that contain detectable genetic material that has been modified through certain lab techniques and cannot be created through conventional breeding or found in nature. These two terms are slightly different, but for the purpose of this paper, they can be used interchangeably. GMOs originated in 1973 when scientists were able to transplant DNA from one bacteria to another. And 9 years later, in 1982, they were formally recognized by the FDA when approval was given for the use of human insulin that was created through genetic engineering. Then, in 1992, the big important piece of legislation that would define the landscape of GMOs for the next 20 years was put into action. An FDA policy stated that foods from GMO plants must meet the same requirements, including the same safety standards as foods derived from traditionally bred plants. Shortly after this, in 1994, the first GMO produce was approved for sale in the form of a genetically modified tomato. This represented the floodgates opening, and following this decision by the FDA, the approval for many more GMO crops was set into motion. From this point onwards, there would be a constant stream of advancements in the scientific knowledge around GMOs. However, the legislation and regulation around these products would remain mostly unchanged in America for the next 22 years. It was only in 2016 that Congress would pass a law that stipulated crops produced through genetic engineering would require a label that advertised it as bioengineered, and products that contain GMO crops would have to be advertised as derived from bioengineering. It is at this point that we should examine this 22-year gap between the initial approval for GMO crops and the minute regulatory step of having to label products that contain bioengineered ingredients as such. Why did this take 22 years? Much of this is because in America, giant corporations with virtually unlimited amounts of money are allowed to spend that vast wealth on lobbying politicians. The goal of this is to create a carefully doctored image of their product, and to do this, they can offer incentives and put financial pressure on these politicians in order to pass legislation that is beneficial for their company. These corporations have convinced legislators, who oftentimes have little to no background in science or agriculture, that whatever is in the best interest of their companies is also in the best interest of the American population. Another issue with the regulatory state of genetically modified organisms is that they are very difficult to independently test for safety. In order for the FDA to certify that a product is safe for consumption, there are tests and studies that must be run. However, it is not the FDA that runs those tests on GMO products, nor is it a third-party institute, and instead it is the companies who want to bring the product to market. For an independent researcher to test these products for safety, they would have to be given the seeds by the company that has created them, and in return for giving you these seeds, the company generally reserves the right to deny you the ability to publish your research, which means that if you find something they do not agree with, they will simply remove your ability to have your research published in a scientific journal. These corporations have relative control over the regulations surrounding their products, the testing processes for approval, and whether the results of independent safety studies are even allowed to be published. An editorial in Scientific American reported, only studies that the seed companies have approved ever see the light of a peer-reviewed journal. In a number of cases, experiments that had the implicit go-ahead of seed companies were later blocked from publication because the results were not flattering towards the product. Earlier in the video, I referred to these products as being misunderstood, and it's time to elaborate on that point. When I say these products are misunderstood, many people think that these products have been proven to be safe. However, the scientific data generally does not state that they are safe. Instead, they oftentimes use phrases like not shown to increase risk to an unacceptable level. However, by the time the results of these studies finally reach the consumer, that direct quote has been watered down to where the message is simply, the FDA said this product is safe, so it's safe. However, a simple look at history will tell you that just because the FDA says something is safe does not mean that is necessarily true. The control that companies have over the regulation of their own products, in combination with some vague wording and creative use of citations, make it easy to understand why the public is so misinformed on this issue. In fact, to prove my point, I will pull a quote directly from the Bayer website. They are one of the largest biotechnology companies in the world, and they state that the Environmental Protection Agency evaluates insect and virus-resistant genetically modified crops thoroughly to ensure that the crop will not pose an unreasonable risk or harm to human health or the environment. Yes, you heard me right. They are not claiming that these products pose zero risk to human health, but are instead choosing their words very carefully and claiming that it does not pose an unreasonable risk to human health. I Googled the definition of an unreasonable risk, and Google defined it as an expected high frequency of undesirable effects or adverse responses arising from a given exposure to a substance. Despite all of this, the future of GMOs is both very exciting and hard to define because we don't even know the limits of what is possible yet. I chose not to focus on this side of the industry because there is already so much relevant literature on the subject. However, I am not claiming that GMOs are not a revolutionary invention with life-saving capabilities, just that we have to be careful that we do not move too quickly and sacrifice the safety and well-being of the many because of the grandiose dreams of perfect designer plants. What we do know is that through the use of CRISPR technology and other revolutionary techniques, we have only scratched the surface for what is possible when it comes to enhancing the efficiency of our agricultural landscape. CRISPR is the abbreviated term for the protein CRISPR-Cas9, which is an enzyme that acts like a pair of molecular scissors. That is, it is capable of cutting strands of DNA. It was adopted from the natural defense mechanisms of bacteria, where Cas9 enzymes are used to foil the attacks by viruses and other foreign bodies. They do so primarily by chopping up and destroying the DNA of a foreign invader, and when these components are transferred into another, more complex organism, it allows for the manipulation of genes that can be referred to as gene editing. With this much power in our hands, proper testing and regulatory standards are a vital part of containing and aiming the vast potential that is realized with the control of a creature's entire genome. Thank you for coming to my fireside talk.